Let's bring in former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He is Chief International Analyst for NBC News. It's good to have you on.
Admiral, thank you so much for being with us. A lot of cross currents here. What's your best read?
Number one, yesterday we had a kind of a universal flicker of hope that we were headed towards some kind of a temporary ceasefire. I kind of felt, man, that sounds too good to be true. I think, unfortunately, Joe and Mika, that's probably too good to be true. And the reason is Hamas, as Richard just told us, effectively reinterpreted the deal that was on the table. And the distinctions here are between time and space. And what I mean by that is Israel wants a relatively short ceasefire, kind of 40, 45 days, because they know they're going to have to go back in at some point. And Hamas, on the other hand, wants a full and complete end. So that's the time. The space part is Hamas is effectively demanding Israel leave Gaza. Well, if those two things happened, a complete stop to hostilities and Israel simply withdrew from Gaza, at that point, Sinwar, this creature of Iran, the mastermind behind these horrific attacks, will emerge from his tunnels, blinking his eyes like a rat surfaced in the sunlight, and will suddenly say, look, I won the war. That's unacceptable for Israel. So, Joe, I don't think we're looking at a sudden ceasefire here, unfortunately. I could be wrong. I hope I am. We'll see what happens as the next day or so continue. But I think we're in for continued combat in that area.
And, of course, then the fate of the hostages continues to hang in the balance. And one frightening notion is that Hamas is saying more about what they have in terms of hostages who are alive. Do we know anything about their status and how many there are, or how much of a game are they playing with that part of this?
I think they are, as is their wont, continuing to manipulate events cynically in real time, hiding the ball one moment, flashing it in front of desperately, tragically affected families the next. All reports would indicate there are less than 100, but perhaps 90-ish hostages still alive, perhaps a very small number of Americans and American Israelis in that mix, Mika. But that's really one piece of the human tragedy, a kind of a micro one that we focus on. The big tragedy, of course, is 2.2 million Gazans who aren't getting the food, the medical care, the clean water that they need to survive in this increasingly dystopian landscape that you're showing us at this moment. So the first, those hostages, unfortunately, will continue to be pawns held and flashed, if you will, by Hamas. The larger humanitarian tragedy, I think, is loosening somewhat. The Israelis are opening some degree of these land passages. Clearly, the move we saw this morning to take control of the Israeli side, the Gaza side, I should say, of the Rafah border, that is so that the Israelis can ensure resupply is not coming in for the Hamas terrorists who are still underground, largely in Rafah. And then third and finally, here's some good news. The pier that the U.S. military is building offshore will come online in the next couple of days, built by Army, Navy, Navy SEALs protecting it. That will be a direct shot of aid, probably 100 to 150 truckloads a day will be able to come in. That should alleviate conditions up in the north. That'll allow the Israelis to move some of the civilians out of Rafah. Then they can do this precision counter-terrorist operation they're talking about in Rafah. Hopefully that'll be the course forward if we don't get the better option of a ceasefire that could be agreed to by both parties in the next couple of days.
Admiral, that precision counterterrorism operation is a lot more challenging than it may sound. Obviously, inside of Rafah, first of all, Israel's asking 100,000 people to move out of that part of Rafah so they can go in. But what What will the IDF be up against? You mentioned the tunnels. You mentioned urban warfare. This is very, very challenging fighting.
It is indeed. And I've said for quite a while, the real center of gravity here is not finding, fixing, and eliminating each and every Hamas terrorist. I think that's impossible. Numbers have been killed. Thousands of them have been killed. There's still thousands operating under those tunnels and in and around that population. So yes, it's a very hard, difficult fight. The center of gravity is not Hamas. It is that complex of tunnels. 400 miles of tunnels. That's where Hamas trains, operates, deploys, directs, holds hostages. Israel will decommission those tunnels. They'll flood them. They'll blow them up. That's the center of gravity. That is the precision part of what they're talking about. But they've got to, your point, Willie, they've got to get the civilians who are cynically being used as shields off of the top of those tunnels. That's a big military move. It's logistics at the end of the day. Militaries are pretty good at that. But boy, that has got to be keeping the IDF commander up at night, every night, getting those civilians out of the way so they can go after that tunnel complex.
And as you say, many of the hostages believed to be in the tunnel complex, so that complicates it as well. Retired Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, thanks so much. We appreciate it.